We have another episode of the Brett Allen Show, a pop culture podcast and video cast where we talk to your favorite actors, celebrities, all the above from your favorite film and television shows, sometimes Broadway, sometimes comedy. It depends. We just talk to a lot of fantastic people. And we have a very special guest today. We are chatting with Rivkah Reyes. And Rivkah, I just have to say, I heard an interview that you did on Knocking Down Doors podcast, which was just absolutely spectacular. And I have to say, that is what, I prompted me to reach out and see if we could get you on the show, because I know you're very open and vocal on social media about your life, but you haven't done a lot of media or press. And so I was like, well, let's see. And then, of course, there's School of Rock, but we're here to talk about much more than that. So I want to say thank you for your time and thanks for hanging out with us today. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. And
Yes.
thank you for listening to Knocking Doors Down. That show was really fun. I was like pleasantly surprised. I had a really great time with those guys. They're so funny.
Yeah, that's a great podcast. And
Are you a regular listener?
I am. Yeah, I've been listening to them for a very long time. I've always been a fan because the types of conversations that they have with people are just really fantastic. And it's great because it's not just a typical interview show, where they're talking about people and having them promote projects and things like that, but they're really getting to know the real individual. And I listened to your episode a few times because I thought to myself, this is really the perfect example of what some people's perspective can be on Hollywood and the way that we think people make it through, child actors, whatever the case might be. I've had several on, and really your honesty and your transparency about your life and your experiences that you've had really don't fit the mold necessarily of what most people's perspective might be. And I love the fact that you're so honest about things like that. So again, I just want to say thank you for your time, but I feel like we have a lot of things to discuss. And of course, I mentioned the fact about your honesty and things like that, but for our listeners, I'm kind of doing this in reverse. If there's something that you want people to take away from your life and from your experiences and just all of the things that you've done, something that has stood by you and sort of helped you sustain yourself through life, what would that message be for our viewers and our listeners?
I think trust your intuition. And that's just really it, especially for women and like queer folks, people of color, but everybody has intuition, whether they know it or not. And I think it's really important to trust it. That's that gut voice that kind of just knows things before we do, even sometimes. And I always say that, if you have a hard time believing in like intuition and stuff like that, just say trust your gut. Your gut's always right, I think, for the most part. And if you're having a hard time trusting your gut, definitely talk to somebody and be like, hey, I have this like gut feeling that XYZ, whether that's like a person in your life being unsafe or a job maybe being not for you, or a job definitely being for you. Just I have a gut feeling that this is what I'm meant to be doing. If you are having a hard time trusting yourself alone, you're not alone. You can always reach out to somebody and bounce ideas back and forth between them. I think really human connection is beautiful and has definitely saved my life. And it's never a bad idea to ask for help when you need it.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I have a follow-up question to that. When we sometimes have those feelings and we're kind of like, I should probably listen to this gut feeling or intuition. I like that term. Like, what do you think stops us from wanting to do that? And we just kind of go with the flow instead of listening to those things and going, okay, this probably is something that I should not be a part of?
Fear. I think it's
Fear.
fear. 1000%. It's fear. You know, that there's the gut voice, right? And then there's that inner saboteur voice that kind of holds us back. I call mine Brenda because that's just the name that I feel like she deserves.
I love it.
And not to say like fuck that voice and like shut that voice out. Definitely it's hard to shut that voice out. And the more you shut it out, the louder it gets, I think. But just being able to like look within and deciphering what's you and what's that inner saboteur is really, it's really, really helpful to be able to discern that. And I know that there are folks who have like OCD and anxiety and mental, you know, differences that you know make it hard for them to decipher what that voice is or whether that's them or not. But just like, I think honestly, fear, and I hear this all the time, is that fear is this acronym for false evidence appearing real. And that faith is the opposite of fear, and they can't exist within the same vessel, the same container. So one will always win. Definitely, I try to let faith, you know, take over. And that's not just like faith in like a higher power. Yes, it is that for me, but it's also faith in myself and faith in love and faith in my choices. Faith in honesty, faith in my gut, and letting faith be the winner of that you know, that metaphorical boxing match between the two of them. You know, doing my best to let faith knock fear out of the ring.
I love it. That's very wonderfully put. I mean, very practical advice for everybody, but even for myself, I'm like mentally taking notes on that. I want to wind the clock back a little bit as we work through your life and things like that. And to when you were younger, obviously, at least from my perspective, and maybe for our listeners who might not be super familiar, but it seems to me that you took to music naturally. That's something that interested you. But what was it that fascinated you about that so much that made you go, this is something that I want to try, or something that I want to be a part of and make a part of my life?
No, my parents say I was a very musical child, that, you know, they would hear me humming and singing at a really young age, like at 2. That, you know, they would like put me down for a nap, and then like on the monitor, the baby monitor, they would like hear me singing like Disney or whatever, you know, commercial jingles. Like I my dad tells this story, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but he'll definitely like tell people that like one day he like heard me like in my crib singing like "Save Big Money at Menards" or some like
I love
some
it.
commercial jingle that I had heard on the radio or TV or something, and that they kind of had discerned that I was meant to be a musician. I think honestly, my parents had decided that I was going to be a musician before I was born. And that's, you know, that's fine. I am. So it makes sense. It is, I think, the thing that I do feel the most comfort in and the most ease in. Like karaoke, you know, being both Filipino and being a, you know, trained vocalist, like I just thrive so hard in karaoke, and just any chance that I get to sing like really is the time where I feel the most comfortable. But yeah, when I was little, they kind of just were like, we're putting you in music lessons, you're gonna take up an instrument. Like they gave me the autonomy to choose, and I chose violin, I think, because that was like the most, in my mind, the most practical choice. And then I took one violin lesson and I didn't like the sound of it, and I was like, okay, I don't like this, but I still wanted to play a string instrument. And so I picked up guitar because it didn't require me to use like a bow. Whereas like cello and violin and viola, you have to use a bow for that. So I started playing guitar when I was 4. And it became this thing that I was just so invested in. I would literally practice 3 times a day. I would go to lessons once a week. And then, the more I got better at it, I would take group lessons and musicianship classes and music theory classes. I mean, it was like kind of like a real life school of rock if you think about it, because I was just taking multiple music classes a week and stuff with my teacher. And it just was my life. It was my entire life. And then, when I was in 4th grade, I was on this radio show called From the Top, where they bring on kids who are classically trained to play their best piece. And that's kind of where School of Rock started looking for kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's from a radio show where they are starting to fan out and look for talent for this movie. Very interesting. I had no idea.
Radio show and some I know they found the boys, Joey and Kevin, they found at like kids rock camp, and they found me and Robert from that radio show From the Top. So me and Robert had pretty much only had classical experience until the movie, and then Joey and Kevin had only had rock experience leading up to the movie.
Wow, that's very fascinating. So that's where acting came in for you, obviously, with School of Rock. Now,
Yeah.
I'm curious because this is very early on in your life when this experience is happening. And I've heard you talk about in previous conversations that it was defining for you. And, I'm sure you've probably talked about this a lot, but I'm very curious. So you are found by whoever finds you, talent scouts, whatever. It's been a while since the film has come out. I'm trying to remember certain things, but you get discovered. Did you have any idea what you were getting into at the moment when this was all happening, or you're just like, I love to play music?
I think a part of me did, that intuition, right? Like, because I knew what a big star Jack Black was, and I knew Joan Cusack from Chicago. Like, we were neighbors. A lot of people don't know that Joan Cusack and I were actually neighbors. We lived in the same neighborhood in Chicago, and like knew each other's families before we worked on School of Rock. So it was kind of like hilarious. The like first table read being like, Joan.
That's awesome.
But yeah, it was really funny. My mom and her were like, oh my God, hi. But like, I knew that she was a famous actress. I knew that Jack Black was like a rising star because, Shallow Hal, Saving Silverman, and Orange County and High Fidelity were all like, recent
one hit after
recently
another.
out, one hit after another, where he was just such a star. And I knew that he was on that level, that people were going to see this. I didn't know it was going to become everyone's favorite movie, because like, it's wild. I literally, every time I meet a new group of people, like there's at least one person who says that like their family watches School of Rock every year, like for, whatever holiday. And I'm like, that's so funny. Like, and I definitely, like 10-year-old me didn't know it would be that level, that I didn't know it would be one of the most beloved, movies of that era. And it truly holds up too. Like I've watched it recently and I've been like, oh my God. And my sister too, she told me, she's like, I guess what I watched the other night. I was like, what? She was like, School of Rock. I was like, isn't it so good? And she was like, yes, like it is, surprisingly, it holds up. Like there's nothing cancelable about it yet. Who knows, in like 10, 20 years, but like,
or 10 or
now,
12 weeks, who knows? I mean,
yeah, right. But I don't think when I was 10, I knew that it would be that level of success. A lot of people, it's funny. I was like looking on TikTok at some of the comments on this one. It was just like a fan had like cut together like a video of like Jack's funniest moments in the movie. And like, somebody like, how did this movie not sweep the Oscars? And I was just like, oh my God.
I love it.
I mean, honestly, it is a great movie. I mean, we were nominated for like MTV Movie Awards and Golden Globes and stuff, but like, yeah, I kind of do feel like at this point, and it's like, of course, 20 years late, but it's like we were snubbed, we were robbed.
I mean,
we
it is
should have definitely won an Oscar.
Yeah,
At least for best original song. Come on, that song slaps.
I mean, I don't know why Legend of the Rent was not nominated for, it's a very smart film. I mean, there's been television shows, there's been Broadway, there's been live productions of it. In fact, the Children's Theater here in the Bay Area did it recently. I mean, it's just like, it's unbelievable. And regardless of what format or context it's in, whether it's a TV show or whatever. In fact, I think there's an actual school of rock here where kids can join and learn to play instruments, or maybe they already
they're
play.
all over. They're all over the place.
And they do music from your film, which is really kind of ironic. And the fact that it's, so popular and just, I mean, it's just a great film. And of course, Sarah Silverman and Mike White and just everybody, which I learned later on, Mike wrote that entire television show,
The White Lotus.
I had no idea.
So it's, I love that show. Oh my God, that show was so good. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. I mean, it's like a brilliant setup. Like, spoiler alert to anybody who hasn't watched White Lotus yet, but like, to start a show with like somebody gets murdered, like somebody dies. Like it's so perfect. It's like, it's such a good,
and it's not who you think it would be, which makes it even better.
I definitely hope they bring it back for a second season. I actually, they are bringing it back for a second season, and Jennifer Coolidge is going to be on it from the original season. I think what they're setting it up is that we're following her character to a bunch of different resorts, which I love, because she was my favorite on the show. She's always my favorite in everything she's in. So I just, oh God, I love her so much.
Yeah, I mean, all of it is just great. So when you finish something like this, School of Rock, it's out, people see it. I mean, obviously then you didn't know it was going to be a cult classic for people to watch. But when you finish something like that, I mean, there were other, Miranda Cosgrove, I believe, was in that, who clearly went on to do other things, and like yourself, and a lot of other people. But when you finish something like that and it's wildly popular, how do you continue on from that? So you're 10 right at that point. So
when it came out, I was 11. We were filming when I was 10. And when it came out, like, I think that, and it's also funny because like School of Rock was my first audition for anything, any acting at all. Not even like school plays, because I was always too busy with guitar. And it kind of set me up. I will take credit. I will take credit for this. And I'll also give a little bit of credit to my mom for this. That we kind of thought that I would be set, that I would book everything because School of Rock was so successful. Because I was like this hot come up, but like, I was really anxious and shy and terrified of camera. I like really didn't want to, like, I did want to be there. I did. And every moment on set was truly a pleasure and a blast. Even when we were all like, we all had to be quarantined from each other because we were all sick. We all had the flu at one point. It was like during the Battle of the Bands too, which is like the worst time to get it, when we all had to be, but they gave us all emergency and we were all fine and like buzzing around after taking it. But like afterwards, getting thrown into like auditioning for, a bunch of Disney and Nickelodeon stuff and a bunch of movies, I guess I was immediately, I was made aware that I didn't have that X factor yet, because I didn't have the experience. Like, School of Rock was one thing, but I had no audition coaching. I had no acting classes or teachers or anything like that. It was just me and my mom. So like, we were kind of in over our heads a little bit, and every rejection to me, I kind of just brushed it off. But to my mom, it was just like, how dare you? And how dare you not see how special my kid is,
Right.
And ultimately I just kind of I got sick of it, and I was just like, yeah, I kind of want to like just focus on school. And at that point it was like in maybe seventh or eighth grade, and I'd gotten really into theater, and I wanted to be on Broadway and do musicals and stuff. So I started taking voice lessons to kind of get geared for high school, because I knew in high school I wanted to do musicals. And it became my dream to like go to Juilliard and like be on Broadway by the time I was out of college, and all of that. So I do tend to set pretty high expectations and standards for myself that some would say are unrealistic. But I just definitely got so sick of it, the auditioning and the meetings and stuff, where my mom and I really didn't have any education on any of it. Like, we didn't know what to do.
Sure.
All we had was the one gig and being on set with the other moms, and like my mom was like talking to them and learning from what they were saying. But again, it just wasn't enough to get me that next gig, if
Sure.
that makes sense. I was called back on multiple times for Hannah Montana. I was close. I mean, but then ultimately Billy Ray and Miley were a package deal, and I just had to kind of let that go. And that was fine. For me, it was fine. I was just like, that's fine. But my mom, it was just like resentment, and we would like make my sisters and I would watch the show, and she'd be like, turn that off.
It was like the reverse. It's like usually the mom is the supportive and encouraging one, and the kid is the
Yeah.
one struggling. But interesting how that dichotomy was different for both of you, because you were just like, whatever, you know what I'm saying? This was a fantastic opportunity. I got to work with some
Yeah.
amazing people.
I kind of was very faithful too. I was, brought up Roman Catholic and had a lot of trust in like God and all that. And I was just like, I know God and Jesus will take care of me. And like, if it's meant to be, it'll meant to be. And I had that mentality as a kid. But then I think in high school, I grew this like, cockiness, because I started getting cast in all the plays and stuff. And,
Yeah.
and I had been, doing well in musicals, that I grew this sense of like cockiness and entitlement in high school, that like I would get into all of the musical theater schools. And I simply did not have the like GPA to get into like NYU and Juilliard and stuff like that. And I was I was again in this position of like being in over my head too, because I I guess I was by the time I was in my second high school, which was my junior year, I was like doing drugs already, and like drinking a lot, and more focused on being liked than I was on getting good grades. And I had kind of become this jaded person, because I did internalize a lot of what my mom was putting on me.
Sure.
Whether she knew she was putting that on me or not. Lots of like body shaming and eating disorders and stuff like that, like that kind of sprung from all of the rejection from these auditions and stuff, that carried me for the next 10 years of my life. I mean, I was like 14 until 24. I just was very, very sick, and like very starving myself, or like eating the same thing every day 3 times a day, because I was sure that that's how I was going to keep the weight off or whatever. Drinking a lot, drinking only black coffee and smoking cigarettes, and that's all that I would intake, aside from alcohol. And just really working myself to a pulp. And I did have success in Chicago as a like theater actor, and I've done like I'd done a handful of like commercial and industrial projects and indie features and indie shorts and whatever, when I was living in Chicago as an actor, like in my like college and like a couple years post college days. But ultimately I was just trying to fill the void, and like it was really dark. It got really, really dark really fast.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, kids are sponges, and as a parent, I know that our kids absorb a lot of things that we might not think that they do. And then it comes out later, very much later. As I mentioned at the beginning, and just even now in these moments, you're very honest about your journey, both in mental health and the recovery and all of those things, and sort of how that sort of changed your life, and really the things that maybe didn't bother you before soon bothered you later. Obviously, your life is completely different now than it was, and have moved forward and most things, at least with what you've shared. And the things that we see on social media are very encouraging, and all of those types of things. I'm very curious, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned from all of this, from early fame and success, and sort of what can happen and what happened later, now that you are pretty well on the other side of all of these things that you've talked about?
I think it's like industry wise, it's never too late, right? I could say a bunch of names of people who got successful super young and then, went away for a little bit and then came back, stronger and better, or people who just simply didn't like have their quote unquote breakthrough until they were, in their 40s, 50s, whatever. I would also, so it's never too late. I would also say, like, don't let IMDb and like Deadline and Instagram and TikTok be your barometer for your own success and your own joy and your own worth. I definitely tied a lot of my worth to what other people's worth or what other people's success and accolades looked like. I definitely got really bitter at some of my, peers, my colleagues, who were in the same college ensemble as me, who got like famous and like verified on Instagram before I did. I held on to a lot of resentments towards comedians who got on SNL before, me. And I am still, I'm not like actively trying to be on SNL at this moment, but like, I'm not closed off to it. I'm not closed off to the idea that I'll maybe one day be on Broadway. In fact, I would love that still. And I do, regularly audition for things that are on Broadway. Right. And like, I regularly audition for things that, that are big. Like, I am still to this day, like it's funny because a lot of people who don't know my work since School of Rock will be like, "Why did you stop acting?" And I used to get really fucking pissed at that. I'd be like, "Well, I never stopped. I fucking always worked since then. I was auditioning," and I'm like trying to explain it, but I don't really have to explain it anymore. I'm kind of just like, no, I've never stopped. A lot of what I did was either like theater in Chicago that only a special few got to see, and that's really cool. Or indie films that you can stream here, XYZ places. You can see me on Netflix in this TV show called Easy. My work is all over. It's all out there. And I have a lot of my stand-up out on YouTube. Like, I never stopped acting. I never stopped performing. It's just that society has like kind of put this thing on actors that if it's not on IMDb, it doesn't matter. It doesn't count. If it wasn't absorbed and devoured by millions, it's not enough. It's not good. It's not meaningful. But every performance I've ever done is meaningful, even if it's a stand-up show for, 20 people, even if it's a movie that was loved by millions. And I just have to remember that, as long as I'm still performing, it's performing. You're doing what you love. And the last thing that I'll say for actors specifically is like every audition is equally unimportant. Even if it's for your dream job, it's just an opportunity to play. It's an opportunity to do what you love. And if you don't love it, then maybe consider like, hey, like I could do something that brings me more joy than this. I've taken several breaks from certain types of performing or art, like guitar. Doing the classical guitar thing that I was doing wasn't serving me anymore. So I stopped doing it and I switched out for musical theater, which was giving me joy. And then when musical theater was kind of getting, tiresome and annoying and clicky and political, I was just like, yeah, let me take a break from this and do stand up, because that's fun. And I get to be myself and I get to like write my own stuff. And when stand up was getting boring, I went back to like regular acting. And when regular acting gets boring, I go back to stand up. I mean, I definitely am a personality type who gets bored very easily. And like it just happens. But as I think, as long as you're checking in with that gut again, and then going back to that, like checking in to see, like, is this bringing me joy? Is this still fun? Is this more like work and labor and exhaustion than it is like joy and happiness and freedom? And making your choices based off of that, rather than on what you think you have to do based on what society says you have to do.
Yeah, 100% agree on all of that. And you never went anywhere. You've just been doing different things. And I think I agree with you. The measure of a person is not based on what we see on social media or through the news or whatever the case might be. Even if it's you're duetting Hamilton at a restaurant. I mean, that's just a lot of fun stuff. And you're naturally a creative. And
I'm like, in my head, I'm like, did you see that video?
yeah, I did. Yeah, it was really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have a beautiful voice. And
Thank you.
again, 100% true. Of course, I mean, School of Rock, I think we all have milestones in our life. That was a big milestone, but there have been many other milestones in your life as well. Your stand-up is great. I mean, just a lot of successes, mentally, physically, whatever the case might be. I think our listeners will learn a lot from this. And if you haven't ever seen School of Rock,
what are you doing?
I don't even know what to tell you.
You're missing out.
You're missing out a lot. Rivkah, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.